We are at the Adams Mark Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm Bill Pitts, director of the State Museum of the Oklahoma Historical Society, and we are interviewing Mr. Finch Stowell. And Mr. Stowell, could you tell us when you were born and where you were born?
Born in Peoria, Illinois on December 3rd, 1919.
Okay. And when did you first join the Navy?
May 3rd, 1939.
And where did you attend boot camp?
Great Lakes Naval Training Station.
Can you relate some experiences in boot camp?
Oh, basically, we had some problems, but nothing really other than my worst experience was the tetanus shots. I had a series of shots in high school and reacted to them, and I tried to talk the Navy out of giving me more shots, and they gave me the shot standard, nobody changes it, and they cut the jumper off my left arm. It swelled up during drill practice and went to the medics, and they cut the sleeve off.
What uniforms did you wear in boot camp?
Well, your standard at that stage, the jumper and work uniform, and dress uniforms for drill, for the I think we called it company drill on Saturday or whenever we had the company drill. The only time we wore the dress uniform.
Where were you sent after boot camp?
I went to the Group 1 Electrical Ordnance School in San Diego.
And when were you assigned to the Oklahoma?
I boarded the Oklahoma on February 8th, 1940.
Did you request to be sent to the Oklahoma?
I requested, that was my second choice. Pennsylvania was the first, Oklahoma second.
Where did you board the Oklahoma?
In Long Beach, California.
And what did you think when you first saw the ship?
I was, let me put it this way. When I was back home in central Illinois, I was a youngster who sang in the choir and that sort of thing. And when I arrived on the West Coast and went through boot camp, it wasn't bad. But when I hit the ship, it was just so big and so many people, and to me, so much more worldly than I was, that it just I was in awe of everything. Crew and ship. So it,
Can you describe your quarters on the ship?
What quarters? We had the stanchions with the pipe ring springs, and you put your sea bag and your mattress on that, and that was our quarters. Had a locker about half the size of my high school basketball locker, so that were the quarters.
Where were some of the places you visited while you were on board the USS Oklahoma?
Well, our visit, the main visit was Hawaii. Went to the Hawaiian Islands on fleet maneuvers and stayed there for some time. And then went in for repair to Bremerton, Navy Yard, for a trip there.
Can you describe an average day on the Oklahoma?
Let's see. You had your muster, your orders, your work, and your training periods, and then your free time, of course, or whatever you like to do or need to do.
Can you remember what you were doing on December 6, 1941?
Oh, no, not really, other than the standard work program and leave.
Were you aware? I'm sorry.
And we'd gone ashore I think it's, on Saturdays, we'd gone ashore. Come back and instead of going to bunk, we went down to the shop. And we could sleep in the shop, couldn't sleep in the bunk.
So you were on land the next morning?
No,
You were.
I had come back to the ship.
Oh, I see. Can you describe what happened on December 7th? Do you remember some events on that?
Primarily that I was sleeping on the bow end of the armor belt when the first torpedo hit the rear end of the armor belt. And I don't think I need to tell anybody that awakens you rather rapidly. And from there we secured the shop, the fire control shop. And my battle station was on as the spotter trainer on number 1 turret rangefinder.
Do you remember any other events that, how'd you get off the ship?
Well, going off the ship, as I said, I was in the fire control workshop, and to get to my battle station, which was in number 1 turret, I had to go down into the handling room of number 1 and then go up through the turret. And when I reached the handling room, all the power went off, and we had some recruits who had just arrived, I think Friday, and there were 8 or 10 of those and a gunner's mate. The gunner knew that I knew my way through the turret, so he told me to lead, and he'd bring the others behind, keep them ahead of us. So we yelled and shouted our way up through the turret. I think we lost one in the shell deck. I'm not sure. We had some problem as we went through. There was a problem. But the humorous part of it came when I got to the turret itself and went by the breeches of the gun to get to my station. We got hit again, and my right leg quit. I couldn't function. It wouldn't function. So I just kept on going because I had one thing in mind at that time, was that escape hatch on the back of that turret was the only way I knew off that ship. And nothing was going to stop me from getting to that point, because that was right beside my battle station. When we reached there, I discovered my rangefinder operator standing beside me. And he hadn't been in this operation at all. But anyhow, I grabbed the phone, tried to call my fire control center, but I know now they were all dead. But there was no response, and so it came down to getting out of there, and we went out. I went out onto the deck and grabbed a little pipe because these youngsters didn't know where to go, and the gunner was in the back and couldn't get through. And I grabbed this pipe, and the whole darn bunch ran right over the top of me, going out and up on the upper part of the ship. And then when we got there, Jensen had said, "You know, you damn near killed me going through that turret." He said, "I got in there, got lost, and I heard you going by, and when you went by, I grabbed you by your leg." And he said, "You dragged me through there, all the way through there." So it was a funny thing there. And at the time we got these kids up to the side, then the Chief Warrant Bosun took control and had us working to get people out of portholes and that sort of thing along the side. But one of our funny things that happen, once you get safe, then everything that happens is funny. It no longer real fear in it to most of the degree. You know you at least have a chance of surviving. But we had a chief bosun mate who couldn't swim, and the chief warrant knew this, and we still had the hawsers to the Maryland. So he told the chief to run over to the Maryland and help people come over. Well, the chief took off, and he got about halfway across, and those lines must have parted directly under his feet, because it looked like one of the cartoons where somebody runs out into space, takes about 4 steps, and then it goes blip down. And that was everybody on the side of the ship broke up when they saw that happen. And the warrant sent, I think it was Red Romans in to get the chief, get him out of there. But it was that type of thing. And once you got to where you were fairly safe, then things were anything would happen was funny after that, I think.
You mentioned that the fire control was dead. Did you mean that the communications were dead, or that the people?
The people, as I know now, were dead. I'm not sure, but either the second or third torpedo wiped out fire control center. It's the understanding I have of it.
What did you do when you got off the ship?
Well, I swam to the Maryland in the oil and that stuff, and went up a monkey ladder, not in rope, to the anti-aircraft battery, which I was a part of on the Oklahoma. Just they fired an anti-aircraft at a low level, and I blew me back in the water, and I started all over again. So I crawled back up, and at that stage I was pretty dazed, and I still suffer from that that problem with nerve damage of the ear. And that blast was enough; it burned the eyelashes off, and the eyebrows rather. And I suppose it would have taken hair and all if I hadn't had my hat on.
So you actually participated in helping fire on the Maryland?
No, I attempted to, yeah. But
Do you remember seeing the Arizona blow up?
Yes, yes.
Can you
We were on the
describe
side of the Oklahoma, working at the porthole, trying to get people out at the time that went up. And it was amazing to see, in my mind I can still see it, the huge chunks of turret flying through the air. It wasn't even imaginable that those things could be thrown that far by anything.
You could see the Oklahoma from the Maryland too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What could you describe of it?
Well, just the same part I saw in Bremerton, the bottom. We got back to it. I'm not sure what the timing was on it, whether it was that same afternoon or the next morning. And we tried to get down to the fire control group area. We knew where it was, and we got as far as I'm pretty sure it was the Marine storage area. We got down that far, and ran into next thing was a magazine, and we started trying to work on that, and they decided we should get out of there, that we had no business trying to cut through with anything to get into a magazine, because it was above the water, and if we touched it off, it would blow everything up. So they forced us out of there.
What ship were you assigned to after the attack?
Destroyer Mugford, USS Mugford 389. The Dunlap class destroyer.
What is your fondest memory of the Oklahoma?
Oh gosh. I guess my first day became very humorous in a sense. It wasn't to me, but it was to some other people. As you asked me what my impression was of the Oklahoma, my first work day, they painted the tops. And I'm not sure to this day how far it is up there, but it must be 400 feet. It's not that far. But my first day with clean dungarees, clean hat, everything, fresh out of boot camp. I'm out there on that thing they called a stage, which was a plank with 2 ropes attached to it. And we were to paint the side of this top, which is a metal cage for the director, the main battery, fire control director. And very few people wanted to work with this new boot who was out there on that stage, because they were going to do all the work and he's going to hang on to the stage, and that's what they knew. But one of my friends, he wasn't my friend at the time, but became one later, came back from Liberty a little well oiled, and he came out the cage window like a monkey, and where's that new boot? And he flew out of the window, landed on the stage, and I bounced about 10 times on the other end. Both hands full of stage and mast or whatever I could get a hold of. For about 2 hours, I think that's about all I did. But after that, I could walk sideways on the stage, I could back up, I could do anything I wanted to up there, and wasn't scared at all. I'd had a good trainer. About 2 hours of it, and somebody decided they could paint with me, and that'd give me a break.
Can you think of any other events on the Oklahoma that you'd like to relate?
Oh yes, I think we had a number of good ones. I think the other one we had, in coming back to the States, we got into a real heavy storm, and somehow both props came out of the water and went back, and they either sheared off pins or snapped the shaft. I think they sheared one pin and a set of pins, but we were dead in the water in the storm, and we had to be towed for a couple of days by a cruiser, and that was an interesting operation in getting the chains out, the anchor chains out, and the tow out. And I think at the time it was fun and an experience, but as we got into the war, it became a very good training exercise. We were able to do things. The men who'd been through that operation could do that anywhere after that program. But that was one. And then we got into Bremerton, and we're fixed, and we're making a short shakedown cruise, and we get hit by a freight train. And I jokingly say this because we ran between a tug and its tow, which was a barge load of freight car. And I think anybody who was on the Oklahoma at that time still remembers our being hit by a freight train. I think it was Captain Lindquist who was the skipper at the time, and he was quite unhappy with the fact that we pulled that one. But those are the major fun ones we had on. The other one I remember was that we rammed the Arizona in night maneuvers off Hawaii, which was after that. And it was either ram the Arizona or get hit by the West Virginia. So the choice was made, and we hit it.
What was the result of that?
Our ship was not damaged. The Arizona had a huge hole in the side, and I don't know whether anybody was injured or not. It seemed to me they lost somebody, but I'm not sure. But it put a hole in our side about you could drive a couple of trucks through it. It was pretty good.
I forgot to ask you earlier what your address is now. Where do you live now?
I live in Princeville, Illinois, my hometown. I was raised there. I wasn't born there, but I was raised in Princeville, back in 212 North Ostrom in Princeville. It's near Peoria, cat country.
Well, we want to thank you. This is May the 11th, 1988. I'm Bill Pitts, Director of the State Museum of History for the Oklahoma Historical Society. And today we're interviewing James J. Stowell. And we're in the Adams Mark Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. Mr. Stowell, could you tell us where you were born?
I was born in a place called Salem, Virginia. That's right outside of Roanoke.
And when and where did you first join the Navy?
Well, I joined the Navy through the recruiting station in Roanoke, Virginia, and took my recruit training in Norfolk, Virginia. And immediately upon finishing recruit training, I was sent to the West Coast. And of course I went to San Diego. And from San Diego then I went aboard the USS Oklahoma, which was laying in San Pedro, California.
You were in boot camp in San Diego.
My boot camp was finished in Norfolk, Virginia. That's just when they had the boot camps back in. Of course, back in those days, they still had the boot camp in there. And I went to San Diego at the receiving station. And then from a receiving station in San Diego, then they transferred me up to San Pedro to go aboard the USS Oklahoma. And that was back in 1940. I guess it had to be around April of 1940.
Can you relate some experiences you had in boot camp?
Oh, that was terrific, yeah. I often wondered, I can't remember the guys, really the chief's name that was our recruit commander. But he was very small, and everybody really had a grudge against him. And I think, everybody that's a little smaller than another person, he always feels a little inferior, but he would certainly take it out on all of the recruits. And Durham, he would pull his sword out of the scabbard and dare you to take him on down out on the field, And he had no difference. He'd whack you across a fanny with that thing when he was unsheathed, It was really back in those days. I mean, they was pretty rough, but he was a very good commander. In other words, we took a lot of pennants, a lot of flags, and of course, during this period of time, he mostly was teaching you for all of your nautical skills, as I say, how to learn how to tie a knot, which I probably couldn't hardly do today. But you did learn all of that while you was going through your recruit training, which is pretty nice. And I enjoyed it. Of course, it's a rough time. I mean, back in those times, they was trying to, of course, I joined in December the 5th, 1939. And of course, that was, England was at war and all the rest of them. And we knew we was going into it sooner or later. And that was my primary reason for joining this service at that time. I just had a feeling I would get real jump on all of the rest of the people and go in a little early, you understand. And really, but when they would sling that old, during that time, of course, you had to carry all your bedding, your bunk rolls, and everything with you. And buddy, that thing was pretty heavy. When you would go on a train, you had a big knapsack, and you had your sea bag, and plus you had your rolled up mattress, and your, in other words, where you could swing your hammocks. All of that was together, and that's the way you went when you was transferred from one station to the other. And even though then I was pretty lanky, you know, it was all you could do to struggle that thing on and off the train, you know, to go to these different spots. And you carried it, nobody carried it for you.
Well, what uniforms did you wear while you were in boot camp?
Well, in boot camp, it was very strict on the regulations. You still had your leggings that you wore, you know, all during your boot period. In that boot period, you had your leggings that you wore. You was always in the uniform of the day. I mean, that's strictly. I mean, and of course, they cut your hair down pretty thin. So they taught you a lot of good things that probably would benefit you later on in life. But you wore mostly your blue uniforms. They didn't have, nowadays you find out aboard ships, on all of these ships, they let them wear dungarees and etc., you know, and these different hats. But back during that time, everything was strictly regulation, and they would get you out for muster in the morning. You only had 15 minutes to be on deck, and I mean, you had to be in your full dress uniform. And of course, everybody was thinking, oh my God, if I could just get rid of these boots, because you did have to wear a pair of these lace-up leggings during that period of time. That's rough duty, really.
How long did boot camp last?
Well, boot camp lasted, I think it was a little over 2 months, because they was rushing them through then. It was 8 weeks, really, that you went through boot camp. And of course, they taught you, if you didn't know how to swim, you had to swim before you could pass, so you definitely had to learn to swim. Fortunately, I could swim when I went in, but some of the guys, it really, I mean, it was rough, you know. The guys would stand there with a big long pole, you know, and they'd pull them out if they couldn't quite make it across the pool. So I guess most of the guys truthfully learned to swim one way or the other. But I always figured it certainly comes in good stead, especially if you're going to sea, because if you have anything happens to your ship, you have a lot of water out there.
Where were you sent after boot camp?
Well, I was sent to San Diego into receiving station, and that, of course, there was only just an intermediate station. I knew that I was going aboard the USS Oklahoma. I didn't know what division or anything that I would go aboard until after I appeared aboard ship. So what they do, I was just trying to think, they sent us by train up from San Diego and to San Pedro. Then we picked up one of the boats off the Oklahoma came in, one of the boats there, and took us aboard ship. And they didn't have bunks, really, for all of the new people that was coming aboard. So that's where you was carrying this thing, you know, they call a hammock. And believe it or not, you have to be, you know, proficient. You know, of course, in recruit training, you were sleeping in bunks. It wasn't the best in the world, but did you ever try to swing a hammock? I mean, this hammock, we swung it up in one of the big casemates were on the gun deck up there. And they did have places where you could tie off, you know, as far as for your hammock. But that's some kind of sleeping, I guarantee you.
Did you request to serve on the Oklahoma?
No, they just picked so many people, I mean, as far as for going aboard the different ships. So that was the one that I was assigned to.
When you first saw the Oklahoma, what did you think?
I thought that was a mighty big ship, I swear. And of course, it was lying out in anchor, you know, and of course we had to ride your motor launch in, you know. And it was quite awesome. And really, when, like I say, when we had to sling in the hammocks for that night until they could get us squared away and assign us to a division. And my God, these guys would fall out, you know, on the steel decks, you know, and you'd be sleeping in that hammock, and all at once they would turn on you. I mean, getting in and out of a hammock aboard ship is quite an art in itself.
Where were your quarters on the Oklahoma?
Well, when I was assigned, and of course, they had us right down below, is in B division compartment. and that was right down below the 5th Division. That was, I guess you would call that the second deck down. It was in what they call a black gang. I was strictly for boilers during that period of time. That's where I was assigned to operate the different boilers, and that they asked you what you would like to, and of course everybody would say, well, I'd rather be an engineer than I would rather be on the deck. Because I watch these guys scrubbing down these decks, with these holding stones. And even the Oklahoma during those times, had those beautiful white decks on there. And they kept them that way one way, by holding stone and that son of a gun down with sand and washing it down with water. And I didn't want any part of that.
What was your rank when you first boarded?
Well, I was still a seaman second when I went aboard, and then I became a fireman second class. After you served in there for a period of 4 months, you became a fireman second class. And I stayed, I had made fireman first before the ship went down. And that was before that I had relocated after the ship went down, I should say.
Did the Oklahoma have an E?
Oh yeah, oh God, yeah, they used to have E's, and the OE's is efficiency rating, especially, for your engineering department. And for the truth being, I don't know if you've ever been aboard ship, or of course down in the fire rooms, and you had your blower, you'd go down through an airlock, and then they had the big blower sitting there, and then you'd go through the other airlock. In other words, they were supplying all of the forced ventilation for your fires, through your boilers. And believe it or not, it would, especially in warm weather, they used to come up and really count the revolutions, I believe, your old warrant officers and especially your chiefs. And of course everybody was trying to, if they only used so much oil to propel a ship for a certain distance, and after a certain period of time you become the E. And of course sometimes they would even give you a $10, I mean really, if you won the E. I mean that was something that they gave you for the efficiency of your ship. But they used to be so hot down there, it was very seldom that you ever wore anything except a short pair of pants after you was down below, because it was too hot in front of those boilers really to survive. And I mean it. Of course nowadays they have it completely different as far as your ships go.
I have a question here to ask you to tell about going on liberty.
Well, I used to be quite a character, really. I used to love to, I guess maybe I was more of a loner than most of them. But I used to love to go ashore, and I really went to I used to do a lot of sightseeing. Of course, you romanced a little few of the girls on the beaches and etc. like that. And you find out that by yourself you could have much more of a time, because it's usually, I mean, you get a gang of people when you're aboard. Of course, we used to go in gangs also, because a lot of times you take different people aboard, But to go on the beach and really just have a nice time, and of course to explore all of the different cities that we used to go in. Of course, we thought Pearl Harbor, of course we went there, and that was quite a thing, Of course, San Pedro, and of course Long Beach, California, and then a couple of us would get together and we'd go to Los Angeles, and it was really having a very nice time.
Could you describe an average day on the Oklahoma?
Well, an average day is really, most of the people, all of us stood watches as a general rule. And of course it depends whether the ship was underway or not. But if you was up, you'd get up early in the morning, and usually you stood a 4-hour watch, and then you was off probably 8 hours. And it usually run, you figured about every 12 hours you would stand one 4-hour watch down below, especially if you was underway. And the other period of time, by the time that you had your meals, and you figure on running 3 meals during that period of time, and then you still had to work those other 8 hours. So in other words, you didn't have too darn much free time to yourself. But the time you got through with you definitely put in just about a 12-hour day. You honestly did. There always something to do, especially down below, keeping all of your machinery operating right, and believe it or not, going down, scrubbing down any holes, I mean, where you have oil spills and etc. It's pretty rough. That was generally what you done. I mean, that was when you was at sea, you didn't have too much time. You was awful glad to go on deck at night, really, because it would be so hot down below all the time. And you very seldom, I used to take my blanket and go up on the main part of the deck up on big nice white decks, and you'd have to kick your shoes off because you'd always find all the old boatswain mates, because these snipes, as they'd call them, would track their deck up there with that oil on their shoes and things. They didn't like that at all.
What was the reaction of the Hawaiians to the mainlanders?
I found out when I first went to Hawaii, I think that they was very, they got along very nice and very congenial. Now I was out there, of course, until Pearl, and we used to go on the beach, and we had different areas, recreation areas, and of course you'd put in for those way ahead of time, and once in a while, I remember once that I had 2 whole weeks that they let me go on leave in recreation, which of course you didn't take your leave any other way, so I went on the beach, and the Navy had set up a unit there, and we would be very familiar with the Hawaiians, and they treated us very nice. Now, it changed a lot after the war, after the war was over, I should say. I came back, and I found out that they detested, of course, I can understand. A lot of the Hawaiians that came back, and they just figured that the Americans, sailors and soldiers and etc. had taken over while he was gone, and he was out fighting for their country. And I could understand it. But you had a lot of gangs running out there back after 1945 when I came back through there. But I thought the Hawaiians were some of the most enjoyable, delightful people that I've ever met. I used to go to Waikiki Beach a lot, and I'd never got a tattoo because I didn't want to be recognized as a sailor so I could associate with the rest of them. And I used to swim on the beaches out there and just enjoyed myself immensely.
You mentioned the gangs. What kind of gangs did you meet?
I'm talking about the Hawaiians. When they came back, we found that they would really pick on the Americans. It was just a bunch of guys that came back, and I guess they were so disillusioned, with the way that they had found their home life, because if you remember, that used to be such a nice, quiet, congenial community. But especially then after the war, we found out that a lot of them definitely was taken advantage of by having such a crowd of people influx the islands. And the islands just didn't have much of a chance here. They really didn't. And I found out I used to be on shore patrol, that's the reason I say back in 1945, and I found out that a lot of them had good cause. The people, they had really been taken advantage of, while they was in the service and overseas. And it made a big difference.
What did you do on board on the 6th of December, 1941?
Well, the 6th of December was just everything. I did break liberty supposedly for that weekend, and I didn't go ashore. I was stayed aboard, and I used to do a lot of reading. And of course, they have what they call a big bull ring. It sets up in the to where all of the draft was taken from. In other words, all the blowers was put in to feed your different fire rooms, and it was what they called a big bull ring, and that was where all of the outside air was sucked down through these blowers that went down to feed all of your different boilers and everything. And I used to get in there a lot of times because it was nice and cool and the air was, coming through, and a lot of times I would get in there and read a book. And this was on, I didn't have a duty that time on December the 6th. But I had stayed aboard, and I went up the next morning to buy the morning paper. They used to come out this ship and they would sell a morning paper. And that was what happened on December, say, the 7th. I was sitting in the bull ring reading the paper.
What did you do when you first got up on December 7th?
Well, I got up just like I normally do. Of course, in there, we was wearing shorts during that period of time. You could wear your white shorts. Everything and I had a pair of white shorts on, and I had gone and got the morning paper, had breakfast that morning, and then I got the morning paper, and I went down in the bull ring to sit down where the nice cool air would come through, and I was going to read the morning paper. And that is when I was thinking of the young ensign that had the quarterdeck. And believe it or not, you could hear, when the alarm went off, it was general quarters. And he was very excited when he was on there, and he says, well, I told him in Annapolis, of course he's a full captain, Ramel or something. I'd met him a few times, and we was discussing, when he had the quarterdeck that morning, when the air attack did come off, and he was saying, and this is no bull, this is a real McCoy. The language to that effect, maybe a little more implicity than that, but it definitely was an air attack. And of course, I was on station before anything, before the first bomb hit, and I guess it was just like a normal day. It had started out on December the 7th, just like a normal day. Gosh, for me, reading the paper and all this stuff, nobody, not even thinking, having an attack.
Were you aware of the Japanese buildup at that time?
Well, yes, and I'll tell you the truth. I was laughing. I have a friend of mine that was aboard ship, and him and I was over. I used to cruise, just like I told you, on the beach a lot, and I would go to these different places. And this had occurred, I'd say, maybe 4 or 5 months before that we was down looking on this Japanese junk, and with all of their communication equipment and all this other stuff. And I really got in trouble with this. Truthfully, I did. It ended out that I happened to have this friend of mine, and we decided we would go aboard. And I said, hell, this is nothing but a Japanese spy ring. I said, no kidding. I said, man, look at all this equipment. They really did. They had all of the old wireless equipment in the world, better than we had ever had even thought of, And so I was convinced that there was a Japanese spy ring, and I was going to report them. Truth, I've been out drinking a little, and having a little fun. And then we had gone aboard this thing. And of course, this friend of mine was taking me back to the ship. But anyway, I was going to report it to the shore patrol. I was just convinced of my state of mind that, really was something, truthfully, and I really believed that we would, sooner or later be attacked. And I really thought that I had a Japanese spy ring all ferreted out, Well, it ended up anyway that I ended up in the brigade, but it was the wrong way. So, and of course nobody would believe you back in those times. Whatever you might say, that was asinine, and it was just something that my imagination had played havoc with.
When general quarters were sounded, what exactly did you hear?
Well, just like I say, I heard the guy says, he did use the words to the effect, this is an air attack, and this is no bull, this is the real thing, because he was very excited. It wasn't normally as you would pass at general quarters. He was a young ensign, and he finally, like as I say, he turned out to be a full captain. In fact, he was in charge. I was up in on the Oklahoma reunion, and he was sponsoring it up in Newport, Rhode Island.
Did you get to your battle station?
Yes, my battle station was in the fire room pump room for general quarters stations, and truthfully, it's hard going back on it. But anyway, everyone down was manning their stations. Now you had to go down through B division compartment, and then you went down to your first. They used to have stages as they went down. Platforms that I should say. You would go down, and they have a large armor deck. The deck below our compartment which would have been B division. And then you had a ladder that went down, say, about 3 more platforms, and that's where your engine room, pump room was located. And we dogged the main hatch down. That's the big armored hatch, and that thing was, oh, I don't know, 14 inches or so of heavy steel. It would come down, you know, that was your armored deck that would protect all of your stuff down below. And we was down on station and had all the steam built up, and in fact we had all the pumps running, and we was trying to get underway. And I really thought we would get underway, but all at once the bombs started falling and the torpedoes, and of course the deck plates would just come completely apart, and your lights, every time you'd get a hit, the lights would go out, but they'd flicker back on. And of course we had battle lamps down there. But finally they ruptured the main steam line that was coming into the place, and of course during this time, all communications down below at that time had been lost. I mean, as far as, you know, abandoned ship and everything, and I understand that they had already had passed the word to abandon ship. And the ship was capsized, and it was leaning over. Oh, it was tremendous. And it happened to be that I was on one of the pumps to where the steam line had broke loose from it. It just dislodged and board, nothing but live steam coming out. And I started up the ladder. I had a big hammer in my hand because of the dogs for your main deck up there, of course, your big armor deck. You had to stand on the ladder, say, and on the side of the ladder. That's how much your ship had capsized, and it was on leaning at a very bad angle. And I got up there and, it's trying to loosen the dogs up for the armored hatch, and everybody down below was screaming, you know, and of course you're getting burnt to death, and of course all the steam naturally is rising anyway, and the whole place was, you know, by that time was pretty well filled with steam, and it was live steam. And I got all of the dogs loose that I could, and I don't know, but you used superhuman strength, I honestly believe, because the last 2 dogs, the frame had been bent in enough that you couldn't get your hammer to them to beat the dogs loose, and I pulled them loose with my hand. And the armored hatch only went about, I'd say, the most, you know, it's on springs to where that your armored hatch, it has to be, you know, it is so darn heavy, you know, and it's sort of balanced on there, and I'd say it opened, I'd say 12, 14 inches, and the people would scramble through there. And of course, by that time there was a deck going to the next deck, which would have been to B division compartment, and they had a ladder there, and the ladder had came loose from the bottom, and I was one of the first ones that had came out past the armored hatch, and then all of these guys were streaming and trying to go up in the other place, and I was holding the ladder for them and trying to help them up. Boy, it's surprising what you can do in an emergency like that.
What side did the Japanese torpedoes hit, and how close were you to them?
Well, it was pretty close, presumably, because we had to be below the water line. And the only thing we could, down there, the deck plates, every time we'd get a hit, that the deck plates would just jump up in the air. You know, they was bolted down to the floor, but it would just wrench them loose. And of course, then you had your other space, you know, a space down below where your deck plates was. And it was awful close, as I can say. And of course, you could feel that old ship every time she'd had to have a hit, man. She would just, you know, I mean, it just shudder all over, you know. And you could feel it go more each way, you know, capsizing farther. And like I say, when I got to the living compartment, I finally got to the living compartment, and the lockers was breaking loose off the walls because you was walking with 1 foot on the bulkhead and 1 on the deck. That's the way you had to walk because the damn thing had capsized that much. And these lockers was coming down and pinning guys, you know. It was really a shamble, and I headed back towards where the sick bay was, which was a rather little distance. And I thought that would be Well, that would, the other armored hatch for the next deck going to the 5th Division, that darn thing was closed. And there's no way that you could have got it open. And of course, you don't have any place to go. You're going back to where that you think that there might be a route out for the ship. But I never made it. I got to the engineer's washroom and the ship just went like that. And that's...
Well, how did you get off the ship?
Well, I was in the engine. When I ended up, you never, you're topsy-turvy, believe it or not. You're trying to figure out where you're at because everything is done when the ship went like this. You in a compartment, and you're trying to figure out just exactly what compartment you're in. And it was just lucky I happened to go in the engineer's washroom. That was the side, the way the ship had flipped over on that side. And I never will forget, I wasn't the only one. There must have been 20, 25 guys in there, I guess. It's so hard to remember because by that time your lights is, kapluy. You don't have any lights. And I remember the door was not a watertight door, and we was trying to close it. And all at once the wall of water just come through. It went underneath the water that much that the water just come through and just whoosh, like that. And then everything was dark. And she went over on her side, capsized, and all at once you felt the water just coming right on up past you, and the first thing you know, it's to your waist. But you don't know exactly where you're at because everything is dark, and everybody is, everybody, I think, was praying, and a lot of people was really hysterical. And I guess I was too, to a certain extent, but I was thinking there's no way, I'm trying to figure a way to get out. I mean, for the love of it, God is a wonderful thing, and I do believe, and I'm religious. I'm not overly religious, but I am religious. But I listened to so many of them praying, and it sort of brought me more to my senses as far as for saying, well, look, God will help you, but you got to help yourself first, And I started figuring out where I was at, and that's exactly what I was going through. And I says, there's got to be a way out of here some way. It's no way in the world I can go back in that passageway and go out. And I knew now I figured out I was in the engineer's washroom, and I said, there should be some way that I can get out of this place. And the engineer's washroom, thank God, had larger portholes than the only one who had a larger porthole, I guess, was in this sick bay. And these portholes, I don't know, 14 inches. But they always told me that any place you can get your head through, the rest of your body will go. And I was a firm believer after. But the funny part of it was all of the portholes was underwater. The ship had completely turned in and capsized, and it was under the water. And trying to get one of them open and locating one was your first thought. Because everything by that time, I guess they had these troughs in the engineer's washroom. They used to have places where you washed and had troughs. I know I was standing on something trying to keep my head above water because you didn't have much space between there. And of course that was the deck end, that was the overhead. And anyway, I figured out it had to be a porthole in there somewhere. I went under the water, and God, I said, pray God, give me a dog wrench, because they have these big brass, believe it or not, the Oklahoma had these great big old brass bolts, nuts, and they had a dog wrench that tighten them up with. And so I'm just thinking that somebody evidently didn't tighten them too much, because I truthfully screwed them loose with my hand. And when I did, I could feel the difference between the water on the outside and what it was inside. And of course you could only stay down there just for so long, and you had to come back to the surface and get a breath of air. And I had a friend of mine, in fact this Gene Blanchard, was standing there, and all he could say, and I remember it's just like it was today, I guess, that he said, he was praying, and he said, God, what's going to happen to my wife and kid? He had just had his wife and him had just had a young son. And it was only, I guess it's maybe a month or so old, you know. And I came back up after I got it loose, and I was trying to shake him. I said, now look, you know, I've got a porthole open down here, and it's the only way off of this damn thing. And I tried to tell everybody else in the compartment, I says, there's no other way out. But see, a lot of people was really, you know, I guess it's what they call hysteria, maybe had a lot to do with it. And a lot of them was, I guess, making peace with their maker. I guess they figured, well, you know, this is the way to go. There's no way out. But I tried to tell Gene, and it's really funny because it's really funny because I have been corresponding with his wife, or she found out about this.
Well, this other machine's quit working. We just won't worry about it. I'm sorry.
Okay. But anyway, this guy, Gene, was standing beside me, and I tried to really convince him, you know, that if I didn't come up, there was to follow me out, because, I mean, this is it. So anyway, his wife found out from this friend of mine, Bill Henley, the one that I was with when I got in trouble out of the ship, you know, looking for the wireless down on this darn big junk, Chinese junk that they had there at Pearl. But anyway, he didn't get off the ship, and his wife had found out about this, and she wrote to me, and I wrote back to her, and I had tried to contact her on the West Coast when I came back across, but evidently she had moved, and there was no address. See, she was living, I think, in Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken.
And what was his name again?
Gene Blanchard. He was, and like I say, she's coming to the reunion here, believe it or not. I've never met her. I mean, after all of these years now, she has contacted me, and we've been corresponding with one another. In fact, I'm hoping to pick her up at the airport this evening. She's flying in from Tacoma, Washington, because she found out at the Oklahoma reunions, and she just felt involved, you know, very much so. And
so you went ahead and...
So I went ahead, and it took me 4 tries. I removed everything but my shoes. I never could figure why I had my shoes on. But I couldn't get through the porthole. It was so damn small, and so I was feeling on top of the oil, and it was just coated with this heavy oil, and I would take it and rub it all over me, and it saturate my whole body, you know, took all my clothes off and all this stuff, you know. And I figured, well, that would make it so much easier if I did go down. And the 4th time I came out, and the 4th time I say one of the longest trips that I've ever swam to the top. And it was awful dark where I was at, you know, and I could finally show myself out. And I got out of the porthole, and I was going to the surface, and I was swimming as hard as I could. I was a fairly good swimmer. And God, you could see the water getting lighter as you got a little close to the top, you know. And when I broke surface, of course, the Japs had wrecked all of their havoc up there. And the bombs was exploding in the water, and I know I had no more than got to the surface, and I was only there just a couple seconds, and something hit me in the leg, you know, and I just went, in the force of it, anyways, just submerged me. I went back underneath, and I was fighting to get my way back to the top. And then by that time, you had oil fires all the way around you, and a lot of the gasoline, I guess, and there's these planes laying out there, you know, that it came off of the ship. You know, they used to shoot planes off of there, and also, I don't know whether it came off the Arizona or whether it was off the Okie or one of the other ships, but that's where I swam for anyway, trying to get away from the fire that was on the water also, and I got to this floats there. And I was holding on these airplanes, just the floats, and it was just, oh, you you had all of this mucky oil on you, you know, and you just couldn't hold on. And I kept going on down, and this was really survival. I mean, at the utmost by that time, because I was sick anyway, because I'd swallowed a lot of salt water and all of this other stuff when I was coming out. And I tell you, somewhere or the other, I guess God must have been looking out for me. And there was a fort, and it's one of the seats at the out of one of these motor launches. Of course, it was just right next to me, and that was just a board, you know, the thing you'd went across where the old sailors used to sit on to go to the beach, you know. And my gosh, that's where I crawled up on, and I pulled 4 other guys up there with me. And it's surprising, you know, they was just going down. A lot of them, you know, they couldn't swim, and there was room, plenty of room on there. And then I was paddling for the beach, and I had to go, instead of going over towards the air base, you had to go towards your submarine base because everything was on fire if you tried to go around the ship. And I've brushed a lot of fire away, but we got away from there. And finally some poor soul in a motor launch came along, and that was the most difficult time trying to get us aboard, you know, because, you know, you're covered with oil, you know, and I had no strength left. And of course trying to pull you aboard, and so they got us aboard and they took us over towards the submarine base and let us out. And of course, by that time, the Japs was making their second airstrike in there, and they was coming back doing a lot of strafing of everything that moved, you know. And oh God, I had thorns in my feet. I finally had kicked my shoes off out when I was trying to swim. I couldn't kick. I didn't have anything else on, but I did get rid of my shoes finally. And I said, well, and Lord, I went to some truck came down and picked us up and took us to the submarine base. And we had no clothes or anything, so we used the old lucky bag to find out just anything that you could barely put on, you know. I mean, there's no clothes or nothing. You can't run around naked, but we was using the showers, and I remember I used to use that we had, you know, the ship during those times, they had this bright work polish where they polished all the bright work. And we was using that trying to clean this damn oil off because you couldn't get this off. And burning you up in the meantime, but you could get some of it off, you know. That was hectic.
So you went to the submarine base.
I went to the submarine base.
And where were you when the Arizona blew up?
Well, I was in the water. I think that must have been when I went down. It really was. I had a piece of shrapnel through my leg. It wasn't too bad. I mean, it was bleeding and all of this stuff, you know, when I got over to the base. But I feel sure that the Arizona really blew, and that was what put me down in the water. I was too busy really to worry too much with. I know the bombs was falling, and I know I had one terrific explosion. I know that something put me back underneath the surface of the water. So evidently I must have been there when the Arizona blew.
Could you see the Oklahoma from the submarine base?
Yeah, oh God, yes, Lord, I sat there and cried like a baby. Well, one thing about it, they felt an attack was imminent, you know, really. I mean, after we got all of our old beat up clothes out of the lucky bag and mismated shoes, and they issued all of us a gun. So, I mean, you know, everybody was armed to the teeth, and so we was going to defend anyway. But you could look back over and that's all you could see, you know. I mean, God, all of this ship and the black smoke rolling up and the old kid laying on the side, and God just, well, I stayed there I was just trying to think, was I there? I tried to get a toothbrush. They finally let me have a toothbrush in a way. Because I had to brush my teeth, you know. I mean, God, it was awful, you know, all that stuff in your mouth. And I had to sign a chit for it too, because I guess they're afraid they wouldn't get their money. I don't know whether I ever paid for it or not, but I guess. But anyway, I was there until, gosh, was it the next morning? They came through and they wanted. I know I was I helped pull a bunch of guys out of the water that was just burnt. I mean, you know, and I had a big old rag tied around my leg. I didn't worry about it because, you know, you see other people hurt so bad. And I stayed there for, I know I went on patrol. And, you're afraid to go anywhere because everybody's hollering, you know, halt, who goes there, boy, you better stop. You know, everybody was trigger happy. That was the main thing.
Were you the only one who got through that porthole?
I honestly could never tell you. The only one that I knew. See, in other words, you're down there and you impossible to recognize people. I know that the guy that I was talking to didn't, because you know I had talked to his wife about it.
Well, after you were on shore, what did you do after you got off the Navy or the submarine base?
Well, that was it. They came through in the middle of the night and they was asking for volunteers to go to sea. And you know, I said, hell, I'm ready, you know, really. So I I guess it was about 2:30 or 3:30 in the morning, and we went down and got in some small captain's gig, and they took us out, threaded our way through these other ships, and went aboard the USS Farragut, DD 348. That was the old Farragut, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead. That's the way I remember it. I mean, so we went to sea, believe it or not. And, at the next day, I found myself back at sea. I was out at sea, and of course, and I finally went to see the hospital corpsman on that ship, and he bandaged my leg and all of that. And I never bothered with it all during that time. You see so many people badly hurt, you know. I get a little sentimental when I start.
What was your fondest memory of the Oklahoma?
I guess really my fondest memories was the truth when we used to cruise out in the guy was telling me the other night where we almost had a collision with this aircraft carrier while I was out on night maneuvers, you know, and they were so close, believe it or not, they took the flagstaff off of the fantail on that son of a gun when the bow of that thing came across. So you can figure that's close, isn't it, you know? And them big old aircraft carriers, you know, the way the overhanging decks, you know, swinging down. But my fondest memories really, I had a buddy of mine was back from Virginia also. I was trying to think, and I called his name here the other day, that we used to get up on the deck area and lay up there at night, and you take your blanket up on this white decks up there, you know, and that moon would be looking down out in the Hawaiian Islands, and it looked like you could just reach up almost and touch your stars. I think that was some of my fondest memories, was that, really.
Were you on the Oklahoma to cross the equator?
No, I was later.
Well, do you have any other anything else you'd like to tell us about the Oklahoma? That's the end of my list of questions.
No, well, the Oklahoma, a lot of people ask me, said, how many, we were discussing it the other day, how many people did we lose on it? I know I lost a lot of good friends, and every time I start talking, you sort of get a little choked up on it, but I was at sea. The trouble of it was, after I left the Oklahoma, I went to sea on the Farragut, and my God, I didn't see land for a while. We take on supplies out at sea, you know, and God, my mother and them didn't even know I was alive for a long, long time, you know, because communications was really screwed up, and of course I was at sea again. But I love the Oklahoma. That's the reason I'm here on this reunion. I've been trying to make most of them, and I possibly can. And I guess it's my first ship, and you always have fond memories of it. And I've always said this, I thank God it did go down before they made scrap out of it. I was dying like a lady instead of being scrap metal someplace.
Well, thank you.
Well,